At 3:14 a.m., I thought I was escaping my life. But when a deactivated burner phone started screaming, I realized I wasn't running from debt. I was running from a harvest. The voice on the line saved me from a collapsing bridge, only to reveal that my pregnant wife wasn't human and I was just the latest version of a horrific experiment. I didn't think of myself as a monster. I thought of myself as a ghost, a man who was simply fading out of a life that had become a cage, leaving behind a version of himself that was already dead in every way that mattered. The rain was a rhythmic drum against the roof of my sedan, a steady, relentless sound that masked the noise of my heavy breathing. It was 3:14 a.m. In the back seat, 2 duffel bags held everything I owned, or at least everything I wanted to keep. My passport, $3,000 in cash I'd spent 6 months skimming from the business accounts, a few changes of clothes, and a burner phone I'd bought at a gas station 3 towns over. I looked back at the house one last time. It was a beautiful craftsman-style home in a quiet suburb, the kind of place people spend 30 years working to own. To the neighbors, I was Marcus Thorne, the reliable manager of Thorne & Sons Construction, the doting partner to a woman who is currently 6 months pregnant with our first child. I was the pillar. I was the rock. But the rock was crumbling. Thorne & Sons was a hollow shell, buried under $500,000 of debt my father had hidden before he died, leaving me to inherit a sinking ship. And Sarah, God, I love Sarah, but every time she looked at me with those hopeful eyes, talking about nurseries and college funds, I felt like I was being buried alive. I couldn't tell her we were broke. I couldn't tell her the bank was weeks away from seizing the house. I couldn't be the father she deserved because I didn't even know how to be a man. So, I chose the coward's way out. I chose to vanish. I put the car in gear and let it roll down the driveway without the headlights on. I didn't want the neighbor's Ring camera to catch the glare. Only when I reached the end of the block did I flick the lights on. The twin beams cutting through the silver sheets of rain. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I felt sick. A cold knot of nausea twisting in my gut, but I pushed it down. "Just keep driving," I whispered to the empty car. "By sunrise, you're someone else." The plan was simple. I'd drive 300 miles south, switch to a Greyhound bus using a fake name, and disappear into the humid chaos of New Orleans. I had a contact there, someone who could get me under-the-table work. I'd send money back eventually. I told myself that lie to keep my conscience quiet. I'll send them money once I'm settled. They'll be better off without my failures hanging over them. As I hit the interstate, the city skyline began to shrink in the rearview mirror. The glowing skyscrapers of the life I was abandoning looked like a distant, dying fire. I felt a strange, jagged sense of relief. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't have to worry about the payroll I couldn't meet or the look on Sarah's face when the credit card got declined at the grocery store. I was a blank slate. The miles clicked by, 30, 50, 70. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the dark woods of the rural highway pressed in on both sides. I was nearly at the state line when my personal phone, the one I should have already turned off and thrown into a river, began to vibrate in the cup holder. I stared at it. The screen illuminated the dark cabin of the car. It was Sarah. I let it ring. The vibration felt like it was rattling my very bones. Don't answer it. If you answer it, you're caught. It went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again. And then again. A frantic, rhythmic pulsing of light in the dark. I reached out, my hand trembling, and powered the phone off. Silence reclaimed the car, heavy and suffocating. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "I'm sorry," I choked out, the words tasting like ash. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." I was free. I had done it. The state line sign flashed past in the dark. "Welcome to Kentucky." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing pulse. I reached for the burner phone I'd tucked into the center console, intending to check the GPS for the bus station's location. But as my fingers brushed the cheap plastic, the burner phone, the phone whose number no one on this earth possessed, began to scream. It wasn't a standard ringtone. It was a sharp, piercing digital trill that made me jump, nearly swerving into the median. My heart stopped. My breath hitched in my throat. I stared at the burner phone. The screen was glowing a sickly neon blue. There was no caller ID, just a string of zeros. How? Nobody had this number. I hadn't even activated the SIM card yet. I tried to ignore it, but the sound was deafening in the small space of the car. It felt invasive, like a physical hand reaching into my chest. On the seventh ring, my survival instinct lost the battle to my sheer, terrifying curiosity. Or maybe it was guilt, manifesting as a digital ghost. I swiped the screen. I didn't say anything. I just held the phone to my ear, the plastic cold against my skin. For a long moment, there was only static, a low, rushing sound like the wind through dead leaves. Then, a voice broke through. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't the bank. It was a man's voice, low and gravelly, vibrating with an authority that made my blood turn to ice. "Hello, Marcus," the voice said. "I wouldn't take the bridge at the next exit if I were you. In approximately 4 minutes, the bridge is going to collapse. And that's not even the most important reason you need to turn this car around right now." My foot hit the brake instinctively. The car skidded on the slick asphalt, spinning 45 degrees before screeching to a halt in the middle of the empty highway. My chest was heaving. "Who is this?" I managed to gasp out, my voice cracking. "How do you know my name? How do you have this number?" "The how doesn't matter, Marcus. The why is what should concern you," the voice replied, calm and terrifyingly cold. "You think you're running away from your life. You think you're escaping your responsibilities, but you've just driven straight into a crosshair you didn't even know was leveled at your head. Look in your glove compartment, Marcus, the bottom panel." My heart was thundering so loud I could hear it in my ears. With a shaking hand, I reached over and popped the glove box. It was empty, save for the registration and a few napkins. "There's nothing there," I said, my voice trembling. "The false bottom," the voice commanded. "Pull it." I hooked my fingers into the plastic rim and yanked. The panel popped out, revealing a small, velvet-lined, hidden compartment I had never noticed in the 3 years I'd owned this car. Tucked inside was a small black leather ledger and a silver key. "What is this?" I whispered. "That is the reason your father is actually dead," the voice said, and I could hear a grim smile in his tone. "And it's the reason Sarah won't live to see the sunrise if you don't do exactly what I tell you to do in the next 60 seconds. The air in the car felt like it had been replaced with lead. I stared at the silver key resting in the palm of my hand, its surface cool and mocking. The black ledger felt heavy, as if the paper were made of stone. "My father died of a heart attack," I whispered, my voice sounding thin and foreign to my own ears. "The stress of the company, the debt, it killed him." "Is that what the coroner told you?" the voice asked, a chilling amusement dancing in the gravelly tone. "Or is that just what you needed to believe so you wouldn't have to look too closely at the books? Your father didn't owe the bank $500,000, Marcus. He was holding $5 million for people who don't believe in bankruptcy. And that ledger in your hand, that's the map of where every cent of it went." Before I could respond, a low, guttural roar echoed from the distance. Even with the rain and the idling engine, the sound was unmistakable. The groan of tortured steel and the thunderous impact of concrete hitting water. The car rocked slightly, a tremor vibrating through the chassis. I looked ahead. Half a mile down the road where the interstate spanned the Ohio River, the distant lights of the bridge flickered and then vanished into a black abyss. A plume of white mist rose into the air, illuminated by the headlights of a semi-truck that had managed to stop just feet from the new, jagged edge of the world. My stomach did a violent somersault. He was right. If I hadn't braked, if I hadn't answered that phone, I would be at the bottom of the river right now. My car would be a crushed tin can in the silt. "Do I have your attention now?" the voice asked. "Who are you?" I screamed, the panic finally breaking through. "What do you want from me?" "I want the same thing your father wanted, to keep his family breathing." But he was weak. He thought he could hide the ledger and the key and die with his secrets. He thought by leaving you the debt, he was protecting you from the reality of the business. He was wrong. The people I work for have been waiting for you to move, Marcus. They knew you'd break, they knew you'd run, and they knew you'd take the emergency car to do it. I looked around the interior of the sedan. I'd bought this car from my father's estate a month after he passed. I thought I was being sentimental. I thought I was saving money. "You're in a mobile vault, Marcus," the man continued, "and the key in your hand? It doesn't open a box. It starts a clock. Look at the ledger, page 42. With trembling fingers, I flipped through the pages. The ledger was filled with my father's cramped, precise handwriting. It looked like a standard construction log. Materials, man-hours, site locations, until I reached page 42. There, written in bold red ink, was a single address, 1142 Windermere Lane. My breath hitched. That was my home, our home. "Look at the date next to it," the man commanded. Next to the address in the same red ink was today's date, and next to that, a time, 4:30 a.m. I checked the dashboard clock, 3:48 a.m. "What is this? What's happening at my house?" "Sarah is a very light sleeper, isn't she?" the voice said softly. "She's probably awake right now, wondering why the bed is cold, wondering why her husband's car is gone. Or maybe she's wondering why there's a black SUV idling at the end of the driveway with its lights off. You see, Marcus, my employers don't like losing their investments. They think you're heading for the border with their map. They think you've decided to trade the ledger for a new life." "I don't even know what this is," I yelled, slamming my fist against the steering wheel. "I was just leaving. I was quitting. I didn't want any of this." Intentions are irrelevant. Only actions matter. Right now, your action is theft. And the collateral for that theft is currently sleeping in a nursery she spent all afternoon painting. The image of Sarah, exhausted and glowing, her hands covered in pale robin's egg blue paint, flashed through my mind. I felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it burned away the cowardice that had driven me onto this highway. I didn't care about the debt anymore. I didn't care about the failing company. "Tell them to leave her alone," I said, my voice dropping an octave, turning hard. "I'll bring it back. Everything. Just tell me where to go." "You're going to turn that car around," the man said. "But you aren't going home. Not yet. If you go home now, you'll find that SUV waiting, and they won't ask questions before they start shooting. You need leverage, Marcus. Your father was a smart man, even if he was a coward. That key, it fits a locker at the bus station you were heading toward, but not the one in New Orleans, the one 10 miles back the way you came." "The bus station?" I frowned. "But you said I shouldn't go home. Inside that locker is a second ledger, the real one, the one that contains the names of the people my employers are afraid of. You get that ledger and you have a shield. You don't get it, and you're just a man with a target on his back and a dead wife in his future." "Why are you helping me?" I asked, suspicion creeping into my fear. "If you work for these people, why give me the shield?" There was a long pause. The static on the line seemed to hum with a strange, rhythmic pulse. "Let's just say your father and I had an understanding," the man said, "and I don't like seeing a debt go unpaid. You have 42 minutes, Marcus. If you aren't at that bus station in 15 and at your front door with both ledgers by 4:30, the SUV moves in. Do you understand?" "Yes," I rasped. "One more thing," the voice added, his tone suddenly sharp as a razor. "Don't try to call her. Their equipment is monitoring the local towers. If they see a call from your number to hers, they'll know you're alerted. They'll accelerate the timeline. Do you understand? Do not call her." The line went dead. I didn't hesitate. I threw the car into reverse, swung it around in a spray of gravel and rain, and floored it back toward the city I had been so desperate to escape. The speedometer climbed, 70, 80, 95. The rain smeared across the windshield like tears. My mind was a whirlwind. I had been a coward. I had tried to abandon the woman I loved because I was afraid of a bank. Now I was racing against a clock I didn't understand, hunted by people I didn't know, carrying a secret that had apparently killed my father. I reached the small, dilapidated bus station in 12 minutes. It was a squat concrete building sitting under the flickering orange glow of a single street lamp. I bolted out of the car, the silver key clutched so tightly it bit into my palm. The station was empty, the air smelling of stale coffee and floor wax. I found the lockers in a dark corridor near the restrooms, number 214. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. I pulled the metal door open. Inside was a small gym bag. I zipped it open. Sure enough, there was a thick leather-bound book inside, identical to the one in my car but twice as thick. But as I pulled the book out, something else fell from the bag. It was a photograph. I picked it up. It was a picture of my father looking younger, standing in front of the very house I lived in now. He was smiling, his arm around a man I didn't recognize. But it wasn't the man that stopped my heart. It was the woman standing on the other side of my father. It was Sarah. But the date on the back of the photo was 20 years ago. Sarah was 26 years old. In the photo, she looked exactly as she did now, not a day older, not a day younger, and she was holding a newborn baby. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text message from the burner. "She's not who you think she is, Marcus. Look at the baby's wrist." I pulled the photo closer to the dim light. On the infant's wrist was a hospital band. I squinted to read the tiny, faded script. The name on the band wasn't Thorne. It was the name of the man the caller said my father worked for. And then, my personal phone, the one I had turned off, vibrated. I hadn't turned it back on. It was off. But the screen was glowing. A video call was coming through. From Sarah. I swiped the screen, my heart in my throat. The image that appeared wasn't Sarah in our bedroom. It was a dark, sterile room. Sarah was sitting in a chair, her face devoid of the warmth I knew. She was holding a needle to her own pregnant stomach. "You should have kept driving, Marcus," she said, her voice cold and hollow. "You were almost out. Now you're just part of the harvest." I stood frozen in the center of the derelict bus station, the cold fluorescent lights humming overhead like a swarm of angry insects. On the screen of my dead phone, a phone that shouldn't have been able to receive a signal, let alone a video call, the woman I had shared a bed with for 3 years was unrecognizable. Sarah's face, usually so soft and full of light, was a mask of glacial indifference. The needle she held against the swell of her stomach was long, professional, and filled with a translucent, shimmering violet fluid. "Sarah, stop!" I screamed at the screen. "What are you doing? Whatever this is, whatever my father was involved in, we can fix it. Just put the needle down." She tilted her head, a jerky, unnatural movement. "There is no we, Marcus. There is only the lineage. Your father understood his role. He was the guardian of the soil. You were supposed to be the same, but you have a sentimental streak that makes you volatile." "Who are you?" I whispered, my knees shaking. "The photo, you haven't aged in 20 years. How is that possible?" "Time is a resource, Marcus, like water, like blood. If you have enough of the right catalyst, it stops being a thief." She looked away from the camera as if listening to someone else in the room. "The collectors are at the station. You have the second ledger. That was the goal. Thank you for retrieving it for us. It saves us the trouble of digging it out of the concrete." The call blinked out. The screen went black. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my paralysis. "The collectors are at the station." I lunged for the gym bag, shoving the second ledger and the photograph inside. I didn't know what was real anymore. Was my entire life a lie? Had I been groomed by a woman who was some kind of ageless monster? The debt my father left, was it even money? Or was it something far more biological? I ran toward the exit, but the heavy glass doors didn't slide open. They were locked. I slammed my shoulder against them, but they didn't budge. Through the glass, I saw a black SUV roll silently into the parking lot. It didn't have headlights on. It glided through the rain like a shark in dark water. 2 men stepped out. They weren't wearing masks, but they might as well have been. Their faces were utterly devoid of expression, their movements synchronized with terrifying precision. They weren't carrying guns. They were carrying long, slender, metallic cases. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked around the lobby. There was a maintenance hallway to the left near the vending machines. I bolted for it just as the glass doors behind me shattered. Not from a bullet, but from some kind of high-frequency pulse that turned the reinforced panes into fine diamond dust. I scrambled down the dark hallway, the smell of grease and old mop water filling my lungs. I reached a heavy steel door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." I fumbled with the handle. Locked. I looked back. The 2 men were entering the hallway. They didn't run. They walked with a slow, predatory confidence. One of them clicked open his metallic case. Inside, a series of glass vials glowed with that same violet light I'd seen in Sarah's needle. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with everything I had at the door's lock. The clang echoed through the corridor like a funeral bell. On the 3rd hit, the latch gave way. I threw myself inside and slammed the door shut, sliding the deadbolt, just as a heavy thud vibrated through the metal. I was in a utility room. Pipes hissed along the ceiling, and a massive backup generator sat in the corner, humming with a low-frequency growl. There were no windows. I was trapped. The burner phone in my pocket vibrated. I pulled it out. "The vent, Marcus," the gravelly voice said. "Behind the generator, it leads to the sewer bypass. Move or they'll harvest you where you stand." "Who are they?" I hissed into the phone. "And what the hell is Sarah?" "They are the wardens of the strain," the man said, his voice tight with urgency. "And Sarah isn't one woman. She's a series. Your father helped develop the gestation process. You're not his son, Marcus. You're his greatest experiment. Now get in the damn vent." I didn't have time to process the horror of what he'd just said. The steel door to the utility room was beginning to glow cherry red around the edges of the lock. They were melting through the steel. I dived behind the generator. The vent cover was rusted, but I used the edge of the fire extinguisher to pry it loose. I shoved the gym bag in first and then wiggled my body into the cramped, foul-smelling darkness of the duct. I pulled the cover back into place just as the utility room door was kicked off its hinges. Through the slats of the vent, I saw the 2 men enter. They didn't look around. They walked straight toward the generator. One of them knelt down and sniffed the air. He didn't look human in the way he moved. His neck elongated slightly, his nostrils flaring. "He's in the bypass," the man said. His voice sounded like 2 stones grinding together. "Notify the mother. The vessel has the ledger. We proceed to the extraction at the house." The extraction at the house. I didn't wait to hear more. I began to crawl, my hands slipping in the sludge that lined the bottom of the duct. Every muscle in my body ached, and the stench of rot was nearly overwhelming. But the image of the needle in Sarah's hand kept me moving. Was she a victim? A monster? Was I even a person? I emerged 3 blocks away, collapsing out of a storm drain into a rain-slicked alleyway. I was covered in filth, my clothes torn, but I still had the bag. I looked at the burner phone. "I'm out," I whispered. "Good," the voice said. "Now, you have 20 minutes to get to your house. If you want the truth about what's inside you and if you want to stop what's coming, you have to get to the nursery before the clock hits 4:30. "Why the nursery?" "Because that's where the incubator is. And Marcus, if you see Sarah, don't look at her eyes. If you look at her eyes, she can trigger the sequence." "What sequence?" "The one that ends with your heart stopping and your skin becoming a shell for what's growing inside you." I didn't ask any more questions. I ran back toward where I'd left my car, praying it hadn't been towed or bugged. It was still there, sitting under the orange street lamp. I jumped in, the engine roaring to life, and I pushed the car to its absolute limit, weaving through the deserted streets toward the suburbs. As I pulled onto Windermere Lane, the neighborhood looked peaceful, bathed in the pre-dawn blue. But as I approached my house, I saw it. The black SUV was parked in my driveway. The front door was wide open. I grabbed the fire extinguisher and the bag, and I crept toward the house. The silence was deafening. No crickets, no rain, just the thrumming of my own blood in my ears. I stepped into the foyer. The house was cold, freezing as if the air conditioner had been set to 30 degrees. I followed the trail of frost on the floorboards toward the stairs. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice a mere breath. No answer. I reached the nursery door. The pale robin's egg blue paint seemed to glow in the dark. I pushed the door open. The room had been transformed. The crib was gone. In its place was a glass cylinder filled with the violet fluid, and inside the cylinder, suspended by a dozen glowing tubes, was Sarah. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling. But she wasn't alone. Standing over the cylinder was another woman. She turned around as I entered. She had the same face as Sarah, the same hair, the same eyes. But she looked older, maybe 40. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice a perfect echo of the Sarah I loved. "I see you brought the keys to the kingdom." She stepped aside, and my blood turned to ice. Behind her, lined up against the wall like dolls in a shop, were 4 more glass tanks, and each one contained a different version of me. The 4 versions of myself stared back through the thick glass of their tanks, their faces suspended in a state of horrific, embryonic peace. One was a boy no older than 10, his hair a shock of the same sandy blonde as mine. Another was a teenager, lean and angular. The third was a mirror image of the man I saw in the glass every morning. The fourth was older. He was gray-haired, his skin weathered and lined with the same deep furrows my father had carried to his grave. "Do you like the collection, Marcus?" the older Sarah, the mother, asked. Her voice was like silk sliding over a blade. "Your father was very proud of the Thorn line. He spent 40 years perfecting the stability of the consciousness transfer. Each one of these is a container, waiting for the harvest." I backed away. The gym bag clutched to my chest as if it could protect me. My mind was screaming, trying to reject the reality in front of me. I wasn't a man. I was a product, a biological hard drive. "You're lying," I choked out. "I have memories. I remember my 5th birthday. I remember falling off my bike. I remember falling in love with Sarah." The mother smiled, a gesture that didn't reach her cold, empty eyes. "Memories are just data, Marcus. We imprinted the childhood traumas to ensure the stress response systems developed properly. As for love, that was the most important variable. We needed to see if the vessel would remain loyal to the source under the threat of loss. You did well. You ran to protect her, even when you thought you were running from yourself." In the central tank, the Sarah I knew, the one who had painted the nursery, the one who had felt like my entire world, gasped. A cloud of violet bubbles erupted from the mask over her face. Her eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto mine. She began to thrash, her hands clawing at the glass. "Let her out," I yelled, lunging toward the cylinder. Before I could reach it, a hand like a vice gripped my shoulder and flung me across the room. I hit the wall hard, the breath leaving my lungs in a painful rush. One of the wardens had entered the room, his movements so fast they were a blur. He stood between me and the tank, his expressionless face illuminated by the violet glow. "The ledger, Marcus," the mother said, her voice sharpening. "Give me the second ledger. The integration is failing. The Sarah you know is rejecting the strain. If we don't have the sequence your father hid in that book, she will dissolve into a slurry of useless cells in less than 3 minutes." The burner phone in my pocket vibrated. I didn't need to look at it. I could hear the gravelly voice in my head. Don't look at her eyes. Marcus, look at me, the Sarah in the tank mouthed through the glass. Her hand pressed against the surface, right where my own hand had been just hours before as we talked about our future. Tears, real human tears, streaked through the violet fluid. She's dying, Marcus, the mother whispered, stepping closer. Only the ledger can stabilize the process. Give it to me, and I'll let her live. I'll let you both go. We have other vessels. We don't need you anymore if we have the data. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie. But seeing Sarah suffer was a pain more acute than the fear for my own life. I reached into the bag, my fingers brushing the leather cover of the second ledger. Don't do it, kid. The voice didn't come from the phone. It came from the doorway. I looked up. A man stood there, dripping wet, a heavy shotgun leveled at the mother's chest. He was old, his face a map of scars, and he was wearing a tattered construction jacket with the Thorn & Sons logo on the pocket. It was the voice from the phone. Step away from the boy, Lilith, the man growled. The mother's eyes narrowed. Arthur, I should have known you were still crawling through the sewers. You're a relic of a failed batch. You should have decomposed decades ago. I'm stubborn, the man said, his eyes never leaving hers. He flicked his gaze to me for a fraction of a second. Marcus, look at the bottom of the ledger, the very last page. There's a toggle switch embedded in the binding. Press it. If he presses that, he kills everyone in this room, the mother shrieked, the mask of calm finally shattering. The tanks are pressurized. It's a failsafe. It's not a failsafe, Marcus, Arthur said, his voice steady. It's an undo button. It floods the tanks with the neutralizer your father spent his last years refining. It kills the strain, but it saves the host. It'll kill the mother and it'll kill the wardens, but it'll set the rest of you free. And what about the baby? I asked, my voice trembling. The mother laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. The baby is the strain, Marcus. There is no child. It's a concentrated mass of the catalyst. If you trigger that neutralizer, you're murdering your own son. I looked at Sarah in the tank. She was shaking her head frantically, her eyes screaming, no. She knew. She had always known what she was carrying. The pregnancy was just the growth of the next iteration. 3 minutes, Marcus, the mother said, her voice returning to a low, hypnotic hum. 2 minutes and 40 seconds now. Sarah's lungs are already beginning to liquefy. Give me the ledger and I can stop it. I can make her whole. She's not Sarah, Arthur yelled. She's a skin suit for a parasite. Marcus, look at the photograph again. Look at the baby's wrist. I pulled the photo from the bag. I looked at the hospital band on the infant's wrist. I had been so focused on the name that I hadn't seen the serial number underneath. Unit 7, version 4.2, and then I saw it. The date of birth on the band. It wasn't 20 years ago. It was today's date. The photograph wasn't a memory from the past. It was a projection of the future. The man in the photo with my father wasn't some stranger. It was me, an older, gray-haired Marcus. The cycle is a loop, Marcus, Arthur said, his voice filled with a terrible pity. They don't just clone you. They play your life out over and over to harvest the emotional resonance. This has happened 100 times before. And every time, you give her the ledger. Every time, you choose her over the truth. I looked at the older Marcus in the tank, the gray-haired version. He was the only one whose eyes were open. He wasn't asleep. He was watching me. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I gripped the ledger. My thumb found the small, hard bump in the leather binding at the base of the spine. Marcus, please, the mother whispered, taking a step toward me. Don't break the chain. Without us, you're nothing. You're just a ghost in a stolen body. I looked at Sarah one last time. She stopped thrashing. She pressed her forehead against the glass, a look of profound resignation on her face. She mouthed 3 words, "Set us free." I pressed the switch. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a low, tectonic hum began to vibrate through the floorboards. The violet light in the tanks flickered and turned a harsh, blinding white. The mother screamed, a sound that wasn't human, a multi-tonal shriek that cracked the mirrors on the nursery wall. Her skin began to bubble, turning gray and sloughing off in wet sheets. The wardens collapsed where they stood, their bodies folding in on themselves like melting wax. But the tanks didn't break. The white fluid began to churn, boiling around the Sarah in the center. "Marcus, get out!" Arthur yelled, grabbing me by the collar and dragging me toward the door. "The reaction is going critical. The whole house is going to go. I can't leave her." I fought against him, but he was unnaturally strong. As we reached the hallway, a massive explosion rocked the house. A wave of heat and white light threw us down the stairs. I hit the foyer floor, my head spinning, the taste of copper in my mouth. I looked up through the smoke. The nursery was a wall of white fire. Then, through the roar of the flames, I heard it. The thin, piercing cry of a newborn baby. And it wasn't coming from the nursery. It was coming from the basement. The roar of the fire above was a predatory growl, but the cry from below was something else entirely. A raw, fragile sound that pierced through the layers of smoke and mechanical humming. It was the sound of life, unadorned and terrified. "Marcus, the house is coming down. We have to go," Arthur shouted, his voice gravelly and desperate. He tried to pull me toward the front door where the rain was still pouring into the foyer, but I wrenched my arm free. "There's someone down there," I said, my voice thick with soot. "You heard it. A baby." Arthur's face contorted. For a second, he looked like he wanted to argue, but then he looked at the floorboards where a hidden seam in the hardwood was beginning to glow with a faint, pulsing blue light. The sublevel. God help us, they actually did it. They moved the primary core. He didn't try to stop me this time. Instead, he kicked aside a heavy Persian rug, revealing a reinforced steel hatch. It didn't have a handle, but the silver key I'd taken from my car fit the circular indentation in the center perfectly. With a heavy clunk, the locks disengaged and the hatch hissed open, releasing a cloud of frigid, nitrogen-cooled air. We descended into the dark. The basement wasn't a basement. It was a sanctuary of sterile glass and humming servers. It was untouched by the fire above, a quiet, cold tomb. In the center of the room, sitting on a simple wooden chair, was a woman. She was old. Her hair was a shock of white, her skin translucent and mapped with blue veins. But her eyes, those eyes were unmistakable. They were the eyes from the photograph. They were Sarah's eyes, aged 40 years in what should have been a single night. In her arms, wrapped in a simple white blanket, was a baby. "Sarah?" I whispered, my heart fracturing in my chest. The woman looked up. A faint, heartbreaking smile touched her lips. "Hello, Marcus. Or are you the one who comes after? I've lost track of the faces." "It's me," I said, kneeling before her. "It's Marcus. I triggered the neutralizer. The mother, she's gone." "Then the loop is broken," she whispered, her voice a dry rattle. She looked down at the infant in her arms. "And he is the last of us. No strain, no catalyst, just a boy." Arthur stepped forward, his shotgun lowered. "Is it true, Sarah? Is he natural?" "Born of blood and bone, Arthur. Not a tank," she said. She reached out a shaking hand and touched my cheek. Her skin felt like parchment. "They used me to grow the others, Marcus. They kept me here in the dark, using the violet fluid to stretch my years so I could be the blueprint. But this one I hid. I kept him away from the needles." The house above groaned, a massive beam crashing down into the foyer. The ceiling of the basement cracked, dust raining down on the sterile equipment. "We have to get you out," I said, reaching for her. She shook her head, her grip tightening on the child. "I am part of the machine, Marcus. My heart is wired into the cooling system. If I leave this chair, the fail-safe triggers. The mother made sure of that. I was the anchor. "I'm not leaving you," I said, tears blurring my vision. All the cowardice that had driven me to flee earlier that night had burned away, replaced by a devastating, protective love. I had wanted to run from a bank debt. Now I was standing in the ruins of my own soul. "You aren't leaving me," she said softly. "You're taking me with you. Through him." She pressed the baby into my arms. The child was warm, his weight the only real thing in a world of ghosts. He stopped crying the moment his skin touched mine. He looked up at me with wide, dark eyes, eyes that held no secrets, no violet glow. "The ledger," Sarah whispered, pointing to the bag I still carried. "The names in the back, the real names. They are the ones who funded this, the ones who wanted to live forever. Use it. Burn them all down, Marcus. Don't run. Fight." "Marcus, we have 10 seconds," Arthur yelled, pointing to the ceiling. The support beams were glowing orange. The fire was eating its way through the reinforced floor. I looked at the woman who was the source of my life, my love, and my misery. I leaned forward and kissed her forehead. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Don't be," she said. "For the first time in 60 years, I can hear the rain." Arthur grabbed me by the jacket and hauled me toward the emergency ladder at the back of the room. We scrambled up the shaft just as the ceiling of the laboratory buckled. I reached the surface, the baby tucked inside my coat, and we sprinted through the burning foyer, leaping off the porch just as the house collapsed into a mountain of splintered wood and roaring flame. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the woods. I collapsed onto the wet grass, gasping for air, the heat of the fire still stinging my skin. I looked back. The craftsman-style home, the symbol of the life I had tried to abandon, was gone. In its place was a pyre that lit up the night sky. Arthur stood over me, his face grim. He looked at the baby, then at me. "You know they won't stop, don't you? The people in that ledger. They've lost their research, their vessels, and their mother. They'll be looking for the one thing that survived." I stood up, my legs shaking but my spirit solid. I looked at the burner phone in my hand, the one that had started this all with a crucial call. I threw it into the tall grass. Then I reached into the bag and pulled out the ledger. "Let them look," I said. "I'm not Marcus Thorne anymore. I'm not a manager, and I'm not an experiment." "Then who are you?" Arthur asked. I looked down at the baby. He reached out a tiny hand and grabbed my thumb. His grip was surprisingly strong. "I'm his father," I said. I walked toward my car, the silver key still clutched in my hand. I had spent my life trying to escape responsibilities I thought were too heavy. Now, I was carrying the weight of a secret that could topple empires, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a man. I put the car in gear and drove away from the fire. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the Kentucky hills in shades of bruised purple and gold, I reached over and opened the glove compartment. I took the photograph, the one of the older Marcus, and I tore it into 100 pieces, letting them fly out the window like confetti. My future wasn't written in a ledger anymore. It was being written with every mile I put between us and the ruins. But as I reached the interstate, a light on the dashboard caught my eye. The car's GPS, which I hadn't touched, flickered to life. A single destination was already programmed into the system, an address 3 states away that I didn't recognize. And then, the car's speakers crackled. It wasn't the man with the gravelly voice. It was a soft digital coo, the sound of a nursery monitor. "Sleep well, Marcus," a voice whispered from the speakers. It was Sarah's voice, the young Sarah, the one I had seen dissolve in the tank. "We'll see you at the next station." I looked at the baby in the seat next to me. He wasn't sleeping. He was staring at the GPS screen, his tiny eyes reflecting the blue light of the destination. I didn't slow down. I didn't scream. I just gripped the wheel and kept driving into the light of a new, terrifying day. The call hadn't altered my path to save me. It had simply invited me to the next level of the game. And this time, I was playing for keeps.